Welcome, everyone. I would love for you to land here in this time and in this place. When I say this, that means wherever you are. So if you could just take a moment and put down your food for just a moment. If you're multitasking, let that go for a moment and really take note of time and place and anchor yourself there through your breath. So what does your space look like? How's the air feel for you? How's your chair feeling? And if you feel comfortable, go ahead and lower your gaze or close your eyes as you engage in a breath or two that might feel full and smooth and complete. As I ask you, how has your relationship to your breath been like today? Have you taken that moment to really breathe and take note of how you're feeling? And if not, I invite you to do that right now. So in a breath that allows that belly, the lowest part of your belly, maybe 2 inches, 2 fingers from your belly button, to really expand as you breathe in and deflate as you exhale. And just really take note of your internal state. How are you feeling? Where are you feeling? Welcome, everyone. I'm going to remove the spotlight just for a second because I would love for you to just look on the screen and really engage with a face or a name or two, because you are not in this alone. This conversation is happening with this group who have all decided to take some time off on this Friday to talk about a forgiveness process. That to me is always amazing. So go ahead and take a moment and really connect with faces, other humans on this planet that are like geeking out on this conversation around forgiveness. How cool. Yeah. So really taking that face, taking that name, taking that square, maybe breathe it in and see how that makes you feel. Yeah. Since we are talking about expansion, that means it's more than us. Yeah. It's just more than our thoughts. It's more than our feels. We're doing this, co-creating this with others. Thank you all for being here. And I will now take up the spotlight and then share. So welcome to the forgiveness process, stress reduction, both and unenforceable rules. Our mission together in this hour that's going to go super fast is to recap why forgiveness matters. And then specifically today, we're going to be talking about stress reduction, seeing both and dismantling unenforceable rules, which are all pieces of the Stand for Forgiveness Project's steps to forgiveness. So we're just taking that middle chunk. And then, of course, going away with some practice tools, because a lot of this information is not new. It's not new. And it's not particularly earth-shattering or grand. But the magic is in the practicing of the tools, to bringing it out of our heads, out of the knowing and into the doing and the being. Yeah, so I'm going to give you guys some suggestions on how we might practice that. So forgiveness, these steps that are coming from the Stand for Forgiveness Project. There are 7 steps that I discuss when I do the workshop called Mindful Forgiveness. But Dr. Fred Luskin talks about it in the 9 different tools, 9 steps. When you Google his name, Dr. Fred Luskin or the Stand for Forgiveness Project, they're going to be outlining 9 steps. The beginning steps, I call it being heard. And that's what we discussed last month. And maybe you'll recall that we really talked about our grievance stories. We all have them, human condition. There's always something that has happened in our life where we're like, oh, that person, that place, that thing has separated me from the sense of safety or dignity or belonging, and I don't feel good about it. And so often we're not giving ourselves the opportunity or each other the opportunity to really be heard around that. Sometimes because it doesn't make sense. It's big and it's messy, and we don't even know what we're really fussing about. But the step before the topics that we're going to be talking about today, the steps to being heard, we cannot minimize that. the grievance story, the process of grieving, and then even leaning into our revenge fantasies is a vital step in this forgiveness process before we even get to the stress reduction and this both and all the great stuff that we're going to be talking about today. And then the rest of the steps that we'll cover in the months to come, self-forgiveness and the forgiveness story. So I just want to couch this all under why this even matters. Forgiveness, this thing that I've been hearing about since I was little, growing up in the church, talk about forgiveness quite a lot, but not necessarily how to forgive. Like, what is it? I used to think that it was this kind of like this godly thing. If I had enough faith, if I believed in God enough, if I read the scriptures right, if I went through. So in the church world, I really thought about forgiveness as this thing that would be bestowed upon me, like this grace that would come upon me if I did these other works really well. It never worked. It never worked in the sense that inside, I didn't feel that peace. I didn't feel that space. Right. So what forgiveness, unforgivingness will do is it really will decrease our productivity. And I put that at first because a lot of us are zooming in here from the middle of our workday. Yeah. A lot of your bosses have given you time to come here and chat about this thing. So first and foremost, when we talk about mindfulness or forgiveness, bosses and this capitalistic society we live in really love to talk about productivity. And there's a part of me that's like, oh, that's not the most important thing, but it is important. I mean, you are spending ungodly amounts of hours at work. You might as well be productive. So I can see why this matters. For me, this idea of stress and then that casing that disconnects us from one another, that's the thing that really matters to me the most. Like the stress of unforgiving, this tightness that we might hold through anger and resentment that prevents us from really connecting with one another, touching each other's humanity. This is why I'm in it for. It also increases our positive state, just generally speaking. If we're able to let go of that one story that happened so long ago, it'll increase my positive state in this moment. That moment that you just anchored in time and presence, in space, it'll give you just a general positive state of being, generally speaking. It improves health-related qualities of life, specifically linked to heart disease, autoimmune stuff, our liver stuff, and increasing our physical vitality. At the end, in the resources, I actually linked to one of Dr. Fred Luskin's research that will reiterate some of this stuff. So if you guys are fact finders and you need research paper and a PhD to kind of tell you this stuff and it needs to be cited, yes, I get it. And there's some links. I'm not your girl. My job is to really think about these things that was really hard for me to grasp and then translate it for the regular person. And the regular person for me for a long time was at-risk youth. Like, they don't really care about what PhD said, what about what thing. They want to know, how can I connect with them? How will this matter to them? So for me, I really see myself as a translator for the everyday person. And then to that end, I'll draw all kinds of metaphors and stuff that may or may not make sense to me. But this is an encouragement for you to figure out what pictures, what do you need for it to make sense to you? So forgiveness, in the way we are talking about it here in these workshops, it's not about forgetting. It's not asking you to forget the things that have happened to you. This is not about showing weakness, like laying there going, oh, I forgive, walk over me. It's not that. It's not about excusing our villain or failed protector, the person or the thing, the event that did us wrong. It's not to excuse that. This is not an advocacy for reconciliation. So that person or place or whatever, I'm not sitting there saying, okay, after you do this, now go hands and skip down the street singing Kumbaya. This is not that conversation. It's a different conversation, but that's not the one we're having here today. It's not about, it's and not linked to reconciliation. This is not condoning the behavior that hurt you. It's not about relinquishing the right to seek justice. We can let go, we can forgive, and we can have this expansion in our heart and still take people to task, still go to court, still advocate for justice. We can do both and. We can do both of those things. So the way that I want to talk about forgiveness today is through a few quotes from some famous folks walking around the planet. And as you read this, it might give you an idea of how you might think about forgiveness, because it really is a choice that you can make. Nobody can ask you to make it, or they can ask, but this is a choice that you get to make for your own sense of personal freedom and peace, and an opportunity for a little bit more joy in your life so that you can live on purpose. So you're not swimming through life with holding on to an anvil. The anvil being those old stories of pain and suffering. It's so much easier to swim without that anvil, you know? So Fred talks about forgiveness as reclaiming the power over our own peace of mind. It is a change of perspective. It's a change of perspective that reduces our own suffering, meaning that we have some say around if you're going to suffer or not. Jerry Jampolsky of Attitudinal Healing says, giving up all hope of a better past. I love that statement. Yeah. So often we try to somehow in our minds, we're thinking, if we think about this enough, if we worry about this enough, if we suffer enough, that somehow we can do weird things with time and go back and change it or undo it. Cannot. And it is the key to happiness, recognizing that the past is the past. And in this present moment, you have some say around how you want to live your life. Bishop Desmond Tutu says to release yourself from whatever trauma and hardship you have experienced and reclaiming your life as your own. Reclaiming your life as your own. I think some of us think that, yeah, I'm living my own life, but are we really? Some of us are at the mercy of our old stories, what somebody did to us. We give a lot of power to those who have hurt us in the past. So just wondering which one of these quotes you're resonating with. Nelson Mandela talks about, when I walked out of the gates, I knew that if I continue to hate these people, I'd still be in prison. Releasing ourselves from that mental imprisonment. Maya Angelou says, you cannot forgive without loving. And I don't mean that sentimentally. I don't mean mush. I don't mean having enough. I mean having enough courage to stand up and say, I forgive. I'm finished with it. So I love the idea of that forgiveness is not like this passive, like quiet, thing. It really is about empowerment. It's not mush. It's the courage to say, I'm done. And to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that that prisoner was you. So think about all the stories, the pain that might have imprisoned you up to this point, or up to the point where you were like, yeah, I'm going to lean into this forgiveness stuff. This is all the reason why this matters. And then the impact of it is this absolutely impacts the way that we interact with one another. How you're able to see another. We don't see them as they are. We see them as we are. And if we are suffering, think about that lens that we'd be looking at life through. So the opposite is true. If you can free yourself and you can live with a little bit more peace, a little bit more joy, then how might you see the rest of the world? So this little picture is what helps me think about the formula for suffering, the stories that have occurred. We live through life, and I'll tell you, this is my reality. Okay, that's debatable, right? Talk a lot about perception nowadays, especially in a way that we didn't 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But perception, like my reality is my perception of how I see my life. And then it's juxtaposed to this expectation that I had of it. Yeah, this is my life, but this is what it should have been. This is my life, but this is what, and that separation between the two is the space where I can suffer. And how I do that is I think, oh God, it's always me, never me, poor me, me. It has to be reduced down to just you in this life. And then I think about it a lot. It might keep me up at night. And then there's got to be an object of blame. Yeah, it's because of her or him, that it over there, the reason why I am feeling so poorly. So today's topic, we're going to start off with taking it personally. So if this is the formula for suffering and we have some say or control over it, then there must be something that we can do to undo it. So stress reduction. So it's talking about all of us all of us, some point or another, depending on the story, really take life really personally. Like everything that's done to us, the language that we use is, oh, it was done to me, versus it was done and I just happened to be there. So if you're driving along the highway and somebody cuts you off, that's how we say, somebody cut me off. Whereas maybe in the other car, they're like, I have to switch lanes. Ah, I almost missed my turn. I got to switch lanes. They're over there just switching lanes. And we're sitting there interpreting it as if they cut me off. Yeah, that's what this, at the crux of it, this is what it's talking about. Most of us interpret our hurt in highly personal ways. Generally, our most painful memory is related to the personal betrayal we feel. There are lots of aspects to our grievance that had nothing to do with us, and sometimes that's hard for us to grasp. If we were mugged, that seems so personal, like our physical body was violated, our stuff was taken. Of course it's personally. What are you talking about? It's not personal. But if we were to put ourselves in that other person, did they really pick you, or are they just mugging somebody and you just happen to be that person? You know, having had my doors kicked down and things taken from my home, God, yeah, it feels like a personal violation. And yet I'm thinking, when I use the language of why me, why was I robbed? Do I really mean to say, why wasn't my neighbor? This is the last time my studio was broken into a couple of years ago. And I thought to myself, because I was going through this workshop, going through the training, and I thought, well, I don't mean that I wanted Mike next door who runs that ukulele store. I didn't want him to be robbed. That's right. That's not what I mean when I say, why was I robbed? Why me? I mean, is it okay if it was Mike? No. That's not what I mean. Yeah, but that's the language that we use. So then if I start talking about this with a group of helpers, and that's what we tend to be in this group here, a lot of helpers here. We've been trained really well on the other end of this. So yeah, we know it shouldn't be this. Then we jump over to this platitude-ish sentimental kind of, oh no, don't worry about me. These people have had such a tough life. Let's walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. Blah, 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 blah. Give them a break. Blah, 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 blah. Let's try to see the good in others. Like we'll swing from one end all the way to the other end. And both ends will create suffering. Both ends. So I want to go back to here for a second. And in a world where I'm not a huge believer in trigger warnings and things like that. I really believe that if you are signing up for tough topics like forgiveness, that you'll know generally that we're going to be talking about some tough topics. Very specifically, I'm going to remind you that I'm sitting here, I am safe and I am okay. But I am going to share a story of how one impact of me really perpetuates suffering in a way that I didn't think about before I went through this training. So when I think about me, it almost seems like a selfish thing. Stop thinking about just yourself. But also on the other end, the me, the way that really impacted me is that for several years, I was in a very abusive relationship. So physically, mentally, sexually abusive relationship. And years after, when it was rattling around in my brain, I still was connected to, I wonder what I could have done differently. I wonder how I could have prevented that. I wonder how I could have. So in the moments, in those times, there were things that I would say, like, oh, if I don't wear this outfit, if I come back from shopping on time, if I don't look at this person or smile like that to that person, then maybe he won't. If me. So even after, years after, I found myself still thinking and still feeling the feelings as if I could have had some control over this other grown, autonomous human being who happened to be violent. And if I think about it from this shoes, I go, wait, was it just me? No, he was abusive to his first partner that I am aware of. He was violent to his children. He was violent in the way that he spoke to his staff. He was a violent person. There's not a thing that I could have done. It wouldn't have mattered what outfit I wore. It wouldn't have mattered if I was 10 hours late or 10 hours early. It wouldn't matter what I put on the dinner table or not. This person was an abusive person. And so the entanglement of the why me that kept me in that suffering loop was to think that I could somehow change in a way that would alter this other autonomous being's behavior. Yeah. So this me thing isn't just about being selfish. We do it in all walks of life. Sometimes we'll think like, because that's my child, that they need to like look to me for all the answers, right? There's all kinds of ways that that me brain will get us into trouble. And, you know, as unique as I think I like to think that I am, I often like to remind all of us that we are all unique in the very same way. So when I listen to other survivors of domestic violence, I would hear the same thing. You know, I would hear mostly women, but as we know, it's not just reserved for women. But in my experience with the women that I've talked to, they would all say the same thing. You know, I think I could have been a little bit more agreeable if I was just a little bit more quiet. If I had just spoken up, if me, then maybe the relationship would have been better. And I'm thinking, oh man, I thought it was just me. So part of the lesson in really hearing each other's story around how you think you're the only one allows you to plug into the bigger world where it's not just you. It wasn't just me. All of us suffer from this isolation thinking. Yeah, some of it is our brainstem stuff. Some of it is that old brain, you know, trying to keep us alive. And if we just really burrow in, that might be helpful. When we go through this in a workshop, the thing that I'm always marveling at is we'll all hear each other go, I thought it was just me that thought like that. Yeah, but it's not. We're in this same boat together. So this me. So when we can start to uncouple our thinking from that, it ain't just you. Yeah, you don't make up the whole world. You don't have control over somebody's violent behavior. What you do have access to is you, but that me brain isn't the way to think about that. Then what? Then what do we start thinking about? How can we do this thing called expansion? So first, I like to think about, have you ever, turned on a hose and then the water's flowing out the other end, and then you take the hose and you bend it? What happens? I mean, no water will come out. And we can turn up the nozzle. We can keep turning it up. But if you do not unbend it, then you will not get the results that you're looking for. So in the same way, I think about, in my body, that constriction of thinking that it's just me alone. It's like I've closed up that hose of life. And so how do I undo that before I can do the other steps? So there are professionals who can actually talk about, somatic work and the vagus nerve. But today I'm just going to talk about when you breathe, when we anchored here in this present moment in your time and space, and I asked you to breathe in a way that allowed that lowest part of your belly to expand and deflate, that breath, and just come back to the breath. When I start thinking about me, come back to the breath. And then when you're at a place where you can actually feel the breath coming in, just notice. You don't have to know anything. Just notice. How does that feel when you start breathing in a way that allows air to reach all the way to your belly? Because some of you, if you know my experience, and if you know, and statistically, there's somebody in this group of 88 that will know my story, that might be in a similar situation right now. And that might make you feel tight sad, scared, nervous, angry. That's tightness. And then I'm reminding you, but right now, in this very moment where you are able to log in this very moment in time, where you can open up some of your senses to notice where you're sitting, notice the air, relax your shoulders and your jaw and your forehead, allow that breath to reach your belly. How do you feel? And is there a difference? You have some control and you have some say around that. But it will take practice. And then if you're feeling like there's some more space, then we can do some work. And if you attend Fred's lectures on the other Fridays, or on Wednesdays, actually, he does them now, then we can do some things called PERT, Positive Emotional Refocusing Technique, which is really calling into this moment, into your heart space. So this is a heartfelt activity, right? To really breathe into that heart space. Yeah, the magic of your heart. Yeah, the heart that was there before you had a brain, before you had a brainstem, before you had this thing called thinking, you had a heart. Yeah, so calling into that heart space. Images that might really bring you joy. Maybe that's a scenery, maybe it's a person, maybe it's your child, maybe it's your pet, right? Really allowing that image into your heart space might create even more space in you. And then from that space of wisdom, from expansion, then maybe you can be curious about what lessons you might want to learn, or what steps you might want to take, or what things that you can do that'll really propel you into a life that you want, versus being at the mercy of those stories that are frightening and scary and limiting. So connecting to your stomach, that air, connecting to your heart space. Those are practices that you might want to incorporate. In the apps that you have downloaded from the last time we talked, there are some gratitude practices that you can do that can also work on expansion, and also loving kindness work. Sometimes to really wish yourself well, even if we have engaged in rotten things in our past, can you wish yourself well in this moment? Well, loving kindness might give you some clues to that. So loving kindness might be a practice that you could incorporate. So then from that space, and only from that space where you have taken care of yourself, that it's not all about me, and I am sad, and those stories are terrible, and from that space, now we might be able to look at the story of the other. Our reductionist brain likes to boil stuff down to who's the hero here, who's the villain, who did wrong, who was right, who failed, who succeeded. We like to do this binary thinking. And in this world where we're talking so much about non-binariness, I love it. This can be included in that conversation. It's not about right and wrong. It's not about good and bad. Like, how many of us have hurt others? How many of us have ended up as a villain in somebody else's story? So in just the same way, our villains too have been victims. Our villains too have hearts that hurt. Our villains too are failed protectors too. All of us are going through this like really messy life. Messy life. But to really look at the story of another, we cannot give up our own. There's this delicate balance that needs to be worked toward that says, yeah, my pain is legit. And we live in a world where we're hurting each other because we're hurt. And not just from here. So sometimes people will say, yeah, you know, my partner, and having had partners who have been the person that I've talked about passed away as a result of drug abuse. And then subsequently, I married an alcoholic. And that seems so personal. Like, if I were enough for you, then you wouldn't need alcohol or drugs. I mean, I literally have found myself thinking things like that. Yeah. But if I were really to put myself in that position of pain and hurt that's so deep that I want to escape. Like, what a great mechanism. Like, if my body is so pained, why wouldn't I want to escape it? Some of us escape it through things that are like socially appropriate, I guess, right? Netflix, sleeping, maybe sex, maybe scrolling endlessly on our phone, whatever kind of detachment activities we do. You know, we don't talk too harshly about those, some of them more and more now. But drugs and alcohol, there is, you know, it's like we can talk about those people more readily or freely. I think we're a lot more aware now, thankfully. But if we're talking about compassion, really think about, what does it take for you to escape this pain of this body? Yeah. And if we have suffered any kind of addiction, I might be thinking about that, going, God, those times when I've had to really escape, like my escape is food. And there are times when I'm like, oh God, I feel so crappy. But you know what can help is if I shove so much food in my mouth that my belly is aching, like literally hurting, where I can't think about any other like mental pain. Like I have to deal with this physical body. Yeah, that was my escape. In this moment right now, that seems really nuts that I would do that. And yet I'll do it again. Because the desire to escape a hurting body is great. So when I can think about that and I go, oh, Richard, who has passed away, really lived a painful life. In fact, I knew his mother before she passed away. And she was a terrible woman. And I know you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead and et cetera, but hey, this is my experience. And he grew up in that relationship that was haunting to him and harmful to him. Like I can recognize that. I have some compassion for that without feeling like I'm excusing him for abusing me. Yeah. So how do you hold that? Sometimes it feels like a lot of work to kind of toggle back and forth. So I always ask people to really hold these lightly. And that is through breath. And that is really through connecting here. It's not about excusing his behavior, but it is about understanding pain that has no place. It's about having pain that I want to escape from. And for him, it was violence and also drugs. Yeah, there's a part of me that can understand that. And there's a part of me that aches for that, that wishes that that little person that was my ex, that was my abuser, that was my partner, there's a part of me that wishes that he had love and compassion and that grew up in a way that would have allowed him to be a full-ass human being that had peace in his heart. Yeah. So compassion, it's not that throwaway statement. Oh yeah, let's let people off the hook. They've had a hard life. No, it's about us really understanding and being willing to open up our hearts, but not at the price of our own pain. Yeah. So both and. Okay. So if it wasn't either or, then it's somewhere in between, it being all about me and only me, or all about them and only them. Someplace in the middle. We can hold both of those lightly. That's where peace lives. Where we can have connection to our sense of compassion, where we can touch the humanity of others who are hurting. This both and notice that we have enough space in us for this. But again, not until we've been heard and we've done our own grieving and we've managed our own pain, right? So it's important that we do that so that we can get here to the space where we can hold stories and not get sucked in by them. And then, if we're able to then not only take responsibility for our own stories, our own life, and then go, okay, I can let go of some of this me stuff. I get it. Then we can do some of the task, some of the business at hand. And that is about expectations. If we did not have expectations, then there wouldn't be the space where we could suffer. And I'm not saying that all of this separation creates suffering. I wouldn't know that. But I do know that it's only in the space where we have a perception of reality that is separate and apart from the expectations that we had. That's the space where suffering can be created. Yeah. So let's look at expectations. And then what we might do about blaming these other villains and failed protectors in our lives. Yeah, because it's usually coupled. If it weren't for climate change, then I would. If it weren't for all these isms, then I wouldn't. If it weren't for my mother, then I wouldn't, right? They usually go hand in hand, these expectations, and then where we can place our blame. So dismantling unenforceable rules. It's about, what if we stop drinking that expectation poison? Yeah. If I stopped expecting this abuser to stop abusing me, then maybe I could have made some choices in my life that might have been supportive earlier had I had the support and the skills to do so. Yeah. And yet I kept drinking, God, he's supposed to love me. He shouldn't beat me. And then here I am, still nothing changing. Yeah. That's me drinking poison of expectation, expecting others to live life by the rules that I have set. Most of them are unspoken. Most of them I just have in the heart, back of my heart. So here are some common unenforceable rules, and see if any of these ring true to you, or if some of these trigger some unenforceable rules that you might be carrying in your life. So when we walk down that aisle, or we shake hands and make a commitment, sometimes we have that unspoken expectation that this partner will always then love me. Sometimes because we say it in the vows, forever and ever, death do us part, some of us have said. And then I'm still alive and we didn't say together. So talk about expectations that didn't get met. Some of us in our workspaces will say things like, bosses should recognize and appreciate competent employees, therefore fire the ones that are not competent, and of course promote me, or shower me with some accolades, because bosses should know this. In the time of Corona, or in time of any kind, when people go, I exercise, I eat well, I work out, why am I getting sick? Why was I diagnosed with this thing? Why did I get ill? Unenforceable rule. My family should accept me for who I am and always be there for me. Think of all the grievance stories that get told because this didn't get met. Most of the stories that we hear in groups is about partners, but most often mothers, family members, children. We have a lot of unenforceable rules around how families should behave. People should understand because I've had a difficult life. Yeah, so on the other end, like, you should let me get away with all kinds of nonsense because I've had a sad life. People should not challenge me on my ideas or values. Sometimes we can see this more with bosses, people who are at the head of the family. Because I said so. Because I'm the mom. I wonder how many times I've said that. I've actually articulated this. And you would think you should be able to force this on little people and kids. They still know. They still will not follow your rules, even if it's explicit. So that's how I know it's unenforceable. My partner should know how to make me feel loved. I mean, now we have, books about love languages and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of ways that we can maybe figure this stuff out. But how will they know if you don't tell them? How do they know? Yeah. But we have a lot of this. I get a lot of complaints about how partners aren't making you feel loved. And how they should, because they, walked down the aisle with me and said, I will and forever and always, amen. People will forgive me when I'm ready to say I'm sorry. Well, I said I'm sorry, get over it. Yeah, that expectation, it's unenforceable. People don't have to forgive you. No matter how many times you make amends or say I'm sorry. Life reward those who work hard. Oh boy, how many of us have suffered over this? And count all of the ways that people aren't working hard and somehow making a bunch of bank. And here I am, I'm working so hard and I don't get my dues. Yeah, we suffer a lot. Suffering stories get created with these. And then pick any value. Pick any value, your top value, your top 3 value, your top 5 values. They might even not be your values. They might be just value words that you're using, but we create a lot of grievance stories that say people should be as honest, fair, kind, loving as I am. Even if I know doggone well that I'm walking around violating my own rules, yet I have an expectation that other people would and other people should in a way that I am not able to. So is this bringing up for you any unenforceable rules that you might have? Or are you going, but wait, why can't I have expectations for life? This is not a matter of you can or can't. This is not a matter of right or wrong. This is a matter of how much peace do you have in your heart? How much internal sense of peace are you living with? That's the question. Yeah, a lot of us might be getting our way and still not feeling peaceful in here. Yeah. So the question around these topics are about, do you have peace? The weight of these unenforceable rules we carry. We can shit all we want on others, but we carry the weight of that. Yeah. People should be honest. Every time I write that ticket, how you weren't honest with me, I carry the weight of that. So over time, we hear that language in each other. Oh, I'm so overwhelmed. If I have to tell you one more time, right? We say that kind of that compounding nature of all the ways that we've tried to make people live by our rules and that they haven't, they've fallen short. I can describe to you, God, I'm so tired of this. I'm so exhausted by this. Feels heavy. Yeah, it has a psychic weight for sure. So in our grievance stories, we've placed some sort of expectation on ourselves, on others, on the situation, on the world, on God, that we could not control. And we say it's 2021, there shouldn't be racism. Hello, there is. It's 2021, we should know better, but we don't. So unenforceable rules are like walking around through life with this big old limitless pad of tickets, violation tickets. The only company that makes it is I'm Right, You're Wrong, Incorporated. It's the only place that makes these tickets. We write them, we keep them, we categorize them. Some of us are really brilliant with it. Some of us can be like, you know how I know I'm right and you're wrong? It's because in 1992, you said this and this and this, and you said that you would never ever do that again. And here you are doing it again. Some of us are really like, can keep track. Others of us, we just keep it in a big pile at the back of our trunk. So in all the different ways, think about how many times we've said, oh, this person shouldn't have done that. And then we'll put a big value word around it. So the quick example is, how many of you guys are on timers? If I say on timers, that means if the meeting is at 9 o'clock, you're there on 9 o'clock, no matter what, you're there. Time is really important to you, boom. And then there's some of us who are like, well, it's 9 o'clock, but wait, who's speaking first? Okay, well then I'll be there about 9:30. Or I'll be there at 9:15. Or if I don't run into somebody that's really important that I need to have a conversation with, if none of that happens, then I'll be there at 9, but it's like 9-ish. So if I ever break you guys up into those two groups, I asked you to segregate into those groups. I could ask you for a list of what we call the other group, and you would have some choice words. And most of those are value words. Sometimes we'll say, oh, that person is so unreliable. And then I'll say, explain that. Like, how are they unreliable? Well, every time there's a 9 o'clock meeting, they don't show up till 9:30. We might not say it quite like that, right? But I'm thinking, oh, how is that unreliable? Because I've been to your meetings and the first 30 minutes is literally a junk and a waste of my time. To me, that's a good use of my time. But the value words that might get placed on the other is unreliable, or it might be even dishonest, or they don't care, right? So it's really important to separate out what actually happened versus the language, the hyperbolic language, the hyperbolic value language that you might be using to describe what happened. So this whole world has different relationship to space, personal space, right? If we grew up in the West here, we have about what's a 3-foot buffer. And anybody that breaks that, in fact, there's lots of comedy shows around that, right? So anybody who breaks that buffer and stands too close, yeah, we have words for them. Oh God, this person has no common sense. Yeah, God, they just, and I might not even be able to articulate what problem I'm having with them. I just know that they're violating something. And then the next step I find really interesting, because either if it's a big grievance story, we might have some revenge fantasies, and we talked about that last time. But what I actually want to challenge you on is, what kind of retaliatory action are you taking? Because even for some simple things like time, if I know that you always arrive 15 minutes late, then I might get together with my friends and go, Alyssa's always 15 minutes late. So here's what we can do. We'll let her know that the meeting is at 8:45. And then, then hopefully she'll get there by 9. Yeah. So I'm going to somehow manage or manipulate that. And I've gotten other people involved, or I'll just gossip about her. God, she's never going to be there at 9. She's always late. Yeah. And if I asked you, hey, are you a gossiper? Are you proud of the way that you manage other people like that? Most of us will go, no, I don't gossip. I don't manage people like that. And yet we do. There are little tiny ways that we take retaliatory action. And yet it would be contrary to probably the values that you hold yourself to. So this process of writing these tickets out, and in a group, I would ask you during this week, please try to write 10. Because so much of our life is out of our awareness. Sometimes I don't know that I'm doing this thing, and how can I change this thing to make me feel better, to make me a better employee, to make me a better partner, if I don't realize that this is what I'm doing. So much of this is out of our awareness. So our job is to get to know ourselves. Do you know in what ways you behave around this that gets you knotted up? Or are you just saying, I'm just pissed, I don't know why? Yeah. Sometimes it's because of the weight of all these tickets that you're writing, trying to shit on everybody. This person should be doing that. This person should be doing that. The world should be like this. God should be like that. There's a lot of weight there. So do you even know that you're doing that? So if you want to take a screen grab of this, or maybe make up your own violation tickets, because yours might have different little things. And here's the weird thing about time is, I wrote when and how often here. And the thing about our weird human body that we're living in is that it really doesn't care if it's actually happening or if it's a memory of the thing happening. You're going to feel as if it was happening. So this when, even if that violation only occurred once, every time you think about it and you get that emotional reaction like, oh God, yeah, she always is late, and oh, that makes me so irritated. Doesn't matter, it's reality. You're going to have the same physiological reaction. So that same surge of adrenaline, that same surge of cortisol, all of that, you're going to get as if it was really happening. So it really behooves us to really manage ourselves with some peace. So that when that same ticket pick could be written again and again and again and again and again. So out of 60, 70, 80, 90, 100,000 thoughts in a day, some of us are repeating 80%. I mean, we're not very creative. Our brains are not very creative. It's repetitive and it's a little bit lazy. So you could be having this thought 1,000 times, and each time giving yourself a little jolt of that no good chemicals in your body. So are you aware of this? That's the question. So to get to know yourself, this might be a useful tool. And just throughout the day, every time you catch yourself in awareness, writing a ticket, go ahead and actually physically write it out and put it aside. Write it out, put it aside, write it out. And at the end of the week, just evaluate. Because what tends to happen is that we find same common expectation language. So somebody is late, somebody cuts me off on the road, somebody steps on my shoes, somebody says something really negative. Sometimes I'll use similar value language for all of those. everybody's irresponsible or everybody's disrespectful. So if you don't know, if I ask you right now, what are your top 3 values and you're not quite sure, this might help suss it out a little bit, because we tend to have similar language and then we tend to penalize people in the same kind of way. I used to be an ice queen. Yeah. If you violated whatever rule, I would just shun you. I would just shut it out. I'd give the silent treatment. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to pretend like you don't exist. And it doesn't matter if you're a stranger, my boss, my partner, my kids. So there was a lot of awareness that I gained about how I behave when I am closed down. When I shrink into myself, I tend to behave in the same way. Yeah. Maybe you've gotten that feedback from others, people who love you, people who care about you, or people who just want to tell you about yourself, right? So maybe you have some awareness around that. If you don't, this might be a useful tool. But the actual steps to dismantle unenforceable rules goes like this. You got to be able to recognize it. And sometimes that recognition comes through the feelings that you might have, the feelings of hurt, alienation, depression, hopelessness. Like when you're engaging in life and you feel one of those feelings, it might be useful to go, okay, I wonder what I'm expecting that didn't get met. Be curious, be willing. I wonder why I'm having these feelings, because there's something that's not adding up. And then remind yourself that you're feeling these negative emotions because you're trying to enforce an unenforceable rule. You're trying to enforce an unenforceable rule. And if it's for another person, it's always unenforceable. There's no way that I can get Arifa to do anything that I want. Yeah, because she's her own person who has her own upbringing, her own awareness of life, her own way of doing things. Yeah. And I can sit there and go, Arifa, you could be kinder. She's like, I am kind based on her definition, right? So we might have some semantic issues, but just recognizing that I'm trying to make somebody else or something else behave in the way that I am seeing it. And then be willing to challenge, that. And if that's as far as it goes, that's as far as it goes. When you're ready, come back to it. So we're challenging these unenforceable rules by saying, okay, exactly what is it that I'm demanding to be different? And the word demanding is capitalized. You see that? So it's about the demand that tends to tighten us up. And the words like should, ought to, must, and value or declarative terms will be your clue. And sometimes when we're on our righteous horse, where we're looking down at others, going, we should be dismantling patriarchy. Well, yeah, how much pain are you going to have around that? Like, is this, yeah. It doesn't change the fact that you might be right. However, this is not about right or wrong. This is about how do you want to live? And do you have some space to connect with others? Because even the ones on the other side of that issue, that's a humanity, compassion, all of it counts. Just because you think you're in the right doesn't won't make us feel good to violate our own rules and disregard the humanity of another person. So look for these declarative or value statements and how high you're sitting up on that horse. And then be willing. And this is not one of those wishes and hopes and unicorns and, fairy dust. This is really about changing our language, not only from here, but to really bring it down to the heartfelt. So when I get the question, well, what, we're not supposed to have expectations? Well, it's about the demand. So when I demand somebody be the way they are or the way they should be, versus if I can articulate what I hope or wish or what my heart's greatest desire out of that situation is, not only do I feel better, I think it's easier to hear that. So if I said things like, my partner should not have hit me. I can should all I want, but the fact is that he was an abusive person. But when I look to myself and go, I wish to be in a loving, warm, connected relationship. all of a sudden my trajectory can be somewhere else. Then I have given myself permission to either go and find that or work on this differently. What can I do with a demand or a should? It's another person. But if I know the wishes of my heart, and a lot of us don't, when I say, what's your heart's greatest desire? I'll ask whoever that. People will go, yeah, that's a great place to start. So here's the other end to that ticket or violation. When you notice those tickets and they have piled up, and you can take a screenshot of this, you're welcome to it. Then we want to recognize the humanity of the person. So instead of calling them a villain or a failed protector, I might just want to put the name, yeah, or the relationship, my partner, what happened. And I might articulate exactly what happened, trying to limit my value or declarative language. And what do I wish? What would I have hoped? What was my heart's desire there? And then see how you feel, because the proof is in your body. We can argue our thinking and what I'm doing all day long, but if you filter it and you feel peaceful and you feel at home, and if you feel open, if you feel spacious, if you feel flexible, then we're probably moving in the direction of your life. Sometimes when we do this, then we'll recognize all the ways that I was behaving poorly too, because all relationships are co-created. I'll look at areas where I'm like, oh crap, I fell down there. I did gossip a lot. I did cuss. I did yell. I did behave in a way that I wasn't really proud of. Then I might have to take some additional action besides my hope, wishes, and desires. But that's for another time. That's for another workshop. Sometimes we do that around boundaries, right? But it's important for us to recognize our own behaviors. And then it'll either lead us to doing some work around self-forgiveness, which will be our next month's topic, right? Or it might be just shifting direction and letting go of relationship that you might have been invested in 10 years, 20 years. The question is, you spend 10 more years, 20 more years like that? So we might have to let go of things that we've been committed to. Because the question isn't about time, how long do you want to be married? The question is, how do you want to feel in this moment? This is all there is in this moment. So forgiveness is a life skill. So if I just wanted to pull back out, generally speaking, all of these steps and tools and having people support us around this work is really important, not only for ourselves, but for our communities, for our families. And this is how peace on earth is created. It's not just like this elusive concept. It really needs to start with ourselves first. So forgiveness is a way that we can do it. I'm not saying it's the only way. Sometimes it goes hand in hand with lots of other skill building, but it is a skill to reclaim our own peace of mind. Anybody can do it. And it is really about changing our perspective to reduce our own sense of suffering. This is not about, are you going to be right or wrong? This is, do you want to reduce your own suffering? And it's taking command of your personal choice. No one can force you to do this. Yeah. It's absolutely the natural conclusion to grieving. So again, go back to being heard. Grieving is paramount, but the natural conclusion to grieving is letting go. And this whole idea of allowing ourselves to let go of these past stories that might be pulling us down it helps us to be more resilient in the way that resilience is actually used, not to describe somebody who's so hardened, right? But this real actual term of resiliency, which is flexibility and space. So lots of resources for you here. You can go ahead and grab a screen grab of this. But if this is important to you and you're still stuck here, working with others might help you bring it down to your heart space. Really practicing that skill of being vulnerable and sharing your story and willing to be in space with others so that you can feel what it feels like to go, oh, I'm not the only one. I am connected to a bigger world that's important. Some of you guys want to do this alone. So reading these books and watching these videos are going to be helpful to you. So please continue and practice. So thank you so much for your time, energy, and presence. So in my mother tongue, 감사합니다. And please practice being more at peace, utilizing all of these skills. And I know that there are some chats, and I will review them. If you guys have questions for me, please feel free to email, and I might be able to include that in our next month's session. Please take note of where you are and what you might take with you and what didn't serve you so well, and make a decision to leave it here, because you don't need to take everything. And if you can collectively just take a breath, connecting with faces that are here. And appreciation. Thank you so much. Please practice. That's where the magic is for all of these things. And hopefully I'll see you guys next month. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.